Arsenal, the morning leaders of the Premier League.
And a thumping win, and Arsenal are smiling again.
It is, for now, dreamy stuff.
Arteta, get out! Get out! This club is finished!
We're f***ing 50! We're 50!
It is worse than it was under Unai Emery.
I think this Arsenal will get Mikel Arteta the sack.
How big's the job for you at Arsenal?
We still have a massive gap. We have to respect the process. We will get it right. I'm convinced of that, and we need a little bit of time, that's all.
The process. It has to be respected. This is something that I think everyone can resonate with for one reason or another. Arsenal Football Club. A club that's been a powerhouse of English football long before the days of the EPL. A club that has always attracted winners and celebrated as such since its formation 136 years ago. But for all Arsenal fans that were around to see their club become invincible 18 years ago, my word, that's a long time ago. It's been a long, disappointing road. Glittering football, followed by mediocrity, became far too common of an occurrence. The departures of legend after legend, injuries to prospect after prospect, the tough times seemed like they would go on forever. This feeling of dread and inconsistency, it was prevalent as recently as the end of last season. Going into the current one, I don't think a ton of people expected much to be different. However, Arsenal are on top. Regardless of what happens this season and how they ultimately end up, I think Mikel Arteta and his Arsenal have taught us just a few lessons on how to respect and trust in the process. Which is exactly why a few burning questions have acted as fuel for the creation of this video. How has Arsenal gone from perennial underachievers to title contenders? How has Arteta made the entire mood around the club do a 180? And perhaps, most significantly, what is the process? Yo, what is going on everyone? Really hope you're all doing well. I'm Tinashe and welcome back to the channel. Because I am an uncoordinated fool, I managed to trip while holding my camera the other day. I'm okay, but the camera is not. So no face cam for the time being, but I'm sure we'll get through this together. In short, for all you short attention span having bros, I'm one of them, so no shade. The process in the case of Arsenal was the promise that things will be good, even though at the time that the promise was made, they clearly were not. To understand why this was the case, we have to go back to 2018. 13th of May 2018, the end of a 22-year managerial tenure for the great Arsene Wenger. After years of getting top four and overachieving at that, based on how their rivals were progressing, the club deemed it necessary to go in a new direction. In stepped the Spaniard Unai Emery, otherwise known as the Europa League's ultimate boss battle. After building up a solid resume at clubs such as PSG and Sevilla, Arsenal was up next. Our most sincere thanks go to Unai and his colleagues who were unrelenting in their efforts to get the club back to competing at the level we all expect and demand. We wish Unai and his team nothing but future success. The words of Josh Kroenke on the behalf of the Arsenal board. Emery's time at Arsenal was quite confusing if I'm being honest. It had a less than ideal start as Arsenal fumbled to 2 straight defeats to Chelsea and Manchester City at the start of the 18-19 campaign. Yo, whoever scheduled those two to be their first 2 games, that's kind of unnecessary, man, that's crazy. But then, all of a sudden, the team went on a 22-game unbeaten streak in all competitions between August and late December. A stretch that included a very impressive 17 wins. They were once again firmly in contention for the Champions League spots. However, the team failed to continue their impressive form, ultimately having a very inconsistent second half of the season and missing out on the UCL by a single point. And the team above them? Tottenham Hotspur. Something that would become commonplace. In 1995, Spurs finished above Arsenal in the league standings. Arsenal finished in 12th, so I guess it wasn't all that tough. In any case, it would take 21 years for the Lilywhites to repeat that feat, as Arsenal and Arsene Wenger very much catapulted ahead of them. St. Totteringham's Day is a celebratory day amongst the Gunners, which essentially marks off the day each season where it is mathematically impossible for Spurs to finish above Arsenal. It used to be an annual celebration, but since 2016, the party's been on a bit of a sabbatical. Back to Emery. As you can probably assess, his time at Arsenal was definitely a mixed bag, and I guess there were several reasons that people point to for this. Perhaps the most high profile of which was his very public falling out with Mesut Ozil, Arsenal's certified star man and also a man that was the club's highest earner of all time back then. £350,000 per week. That might look like pennies to the likes of Man City and United, but for Arsenal, this was a gargantuan investment, which is why it was a shame that this investment was going through his own personal problems with his country, a couple of injury setbacks, and generally what looked to be a lack of motivation. Bench. Arsenal fans did not like that. There was the Granit Xhaka incident where he was the acting captain of the club and antagonized the crowd after being booed off the pitch. A poor performance by him and most of the team, by the way, against Crystal Palace, where they let a 2-0 win become a 2-2 draw. There was Emery playing favourites with the likes of Matteo Guendouzi, who apparently could do no wrong regardless of how he played. Of course, this was in part due to the Ozil situation. And then there was the recruitment. Lucas Torreira, David Luiz, Nicolas Pepe, Bernd Leno, Denis Suarez, Dani Ceballos, all players that were very much hot and cold. Cold more often than not. Although I will note that transfers and recruitments aren't really as big a point of contention for Emery's demise as some may believe. Bukayo Saka and Emil Smith-Rowe were both handed their debuts by him. William Saliba, Gabriel Martinelli, Kieran Tierney, all signed while Emery was there. So I guess there are always two sides to every story. In any case, at the end of the day, the problems under Wenger weren't really addressed. Arsenal was soft in the middle and that did not change. The communication on the pitch and seemingly in the boardroom was not there. The play was disjointed, fast when it should be slow, slow when it should be fast. Early into his second season at Arsenal, after 7 games without a win and Arsenal's worst run in 27 years, his time was up. With Emery out the picture, Arsenal were in a bit of a pickle. Freddie Ljungberg stepped into the hot seat in the interim, but we all knew that that was just a stopgap. Instead, Arsenal thought that if one Spaniard failed to work out, why not pass the baton over to another? This time, one with more of a historic connection to the club. To be frank, from the outside looking in, this looked to have all the makings of what many might refer to as the Solskjaer special. With a club in crisis and fire and brimstone raining down on the owners and decision makers, a quick short-term solution involves bringing in a sympathetic figure. A character that seemingly shares the heartache and anguish of the fans. Bonus points if they can be portrayed as quote-unquote one of the people. With all that in mind, it only makes sense that this position is probably best suited for a former player. Mikel Arteta. Born in Spain in San Sebastian, Mikel Arteta is a fascinating case study. Growing up and maturing as a footballer along one Xabi Alonso on the beaches of San Sebastian. Idolizing Pep Guardiola of Barcelona, only to train and play alongside him when Blaugrana spotted him at youth level and enrolled him in the academy. Playing in Paris, Glasgow, Merseyside and finally London, where he captained Arsenal and went on to retire at the club. Astonishingly, the man never played for the Spanish national team at senior level. 0 caps. Which is wild because he was good, but it's also not that wild seeing as he was up against the greatest Spanish midfield of all time as his competition for a call-up. Maybe the greatest international midfield of all time, to be fair. Even Fabregas, Juan Mata and David Silva struggled to get game time with them, so you can only imagine. As such, there were even growing rumors at one point that he was eligible to lace up for England and that he would be keen, but those rumors failed to materialize into anything concrete. Anyway, that was a brief summary of his time on the pitch. However, it's his antics on the sidelines that we've all gathered here to speak on. Towards the end of Arteta's playing career, injuries plagued him and probably played a large part in him hanging up his boots. He was only 34 after all. As he had done throughout his career, more so in his later years, he spent a lot of time assessing the field of play and learning all that he could from each manager and colleague he interacted with. There was a story that came out a while ago about how Guardiola called up Arteta in 2012 before Barcelona's UCL semi-final clash against Chelsea. This was to get the then Arsenal players' analysis of the Blues. Pep was impressed. There are stories from when he was a player about how Arteta would spend more time interacting with his coaches than his fellow teammates during training sessions. Apparently this led to him affectionately being labeled as a teacher's pet. Stories like that explain why it's no surprise that Spurs, Arsenal and Manchester City all vied for his coaching services in one way or another when he retired. Spurs as an assistant coach because he played with Poch in Paris, Arsenal as an academy coach because Wenger was very impressed by his captain, and City as an assistant because Guardiola never forgets. City won the race. 3 years, 2 Premier League titles, and a few hair-raising moments later from Arteta, and at 37 years of age, Arteta returned to the Emirates. This time, he took the hot seat. You have to be honest with yourself. For me, the standards you need to play for this club, it cannot be 8 out of 10. It has to be 10 out of 10. When you cannot deliver that, it is not good enough. In this quote, Arteta was talking about himself when explaining his reasons for retiring when he did. This is the man that was taking up the reins at Arsenal. Encouraging signs, but to say he was walking into a baptism of fire would be an understatement.
Arteta out. I'm not gonna lie to you. Arteta out.
Arteta out till we die, okay?
Similar to Emery and Ljungberg's experiences, a very tall task was at hand. How do you plug holes in what looks to be a sinking ship? With Arteta? This dude may have been coming in as an absolute football genius that was closely tutored by one of football's greatest ever geniuses, but this was still his first foray into the head coach role, and it was for one of the biggest teams on the planet. It goes without saying that the skepticism around this appointment was palpable. Despite this, an FA Cup came at the end of his first season in charge, which is kinda crazy to be honest. However, there were still some large cracks in the wall, and 9 wins, 6 draws and 5 losses in his first 20 EPL games, culminating in an 8th place finish, is pretty difficult to cover up, their worst league finish since 1995. And unfortunately for Arteta, as many expected, Arsenal didn't really seem to progress in the following years. 8th again, then 5th. At a glance, this experiment simply wasn't working. Arteta had bought a lot of goodwill by winning the FA Cup almost immediately, and many thought that this was the sole reason that he was still in a job even at his lowest points. Lowest points which included a 7-game winless streak in late 2020 and also featured a 2-0 loss to Spurs. This poor display was disappointing, perhaps even unsalvageable, but for some reason, the board clearly believed in him long term. Any other top 6 team would likely not be as patient, but Arsenal were. And kudos to them for that. We have to remember that the squad he inherited was in need of a major purge. Players from Wenger's era and beyond that were either overpaid, well past it, or just plain bad on the pitch were still bopping around. The previous squad lacked what Arteta was truly after: control. We have to dictate the game, we have to be the ones taking the initiative, and we have to entertain the people coming to watch us. For so long under Arteta, Arsenal would pass the ball well and apply the right pressure, only for a routine lapse in concentration to cause a collapse. A lack of creativity and defensive composure can partly be blamed for this, but perhaps the most important missing piece was a culture of accountability. Players knowing what their job is and doing it. With the current Arsenal squad, accountability is pouring out from every direction. In attack, the numbers don't lie. Over the past 3 seasons of Arteta, Arsenal have steadily increased their expected scoring output per game, and so far this season, they're exceeding it. As far as possession goes, the increase is marginal, but the story is the same, an increase indicative of a growing ability to assert themselves. For goals conceded, the improvement hasn't been as steady as for goals scored. However, that's been an area that has seen a sizable improvement so far this campaign. Along with Newcastle, they've conceded the least with 11, which is a story in itself, you know. So how has this happened? Well, to say that Arsenal has simply gotten in the right people would be an oversimplification. However, it's true. We always hear every fan base say their team is 1 or 2 signings away from being serious contenders. I guess Arsenal fans were right this time. This is Arsenal's lineup for Unai Emery's final Premier League game as manager on the 23rd of November 2019, including the bench and the manager. Only 3 people are still in the squad. That pretty much tells you all you need to know about what was deemed to be necessary for Arsenal to get to the level that they're at today. This is Arsenal's most used lineup so far. The dynamism and efficiency on offer here has really been a game changer. William Saliba's been an Arsenal player since 2019, but was loaned out immediately before he was deemed to be ready. And when was he deemed to be ready, you ask? This season. At only 21, he's been a revelation for this backline. Some may not agree with it, but he's my personal pick for Arsenal's Player of the Year so far. He's just so calm and collected on the ball. Tall, strong, all you need. Aaron Ramsdale, Gabriel, Ben White, Takahiro Tomiyasu, Alexander Zinchenko, all backline players acquired within the past 2 years, all 25 or younger. A completely revitalized midfield has been doing the business too. Thomas Partey is the CDM and missing link in the middle they've needed for so long. It seems as though Martin Ødegaard has been around forever, because he has, but it's still shocking that he's only 23. The creativity brought to the table by him and Emil Smith-Rowe, for example, has made many forget about the departure of Mesut Ozil, which is no easy feat, for sure. The pace and what has now become end product of Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli has everyone shook. And Gabriel Jesus just has that dog in him, doesn't he? Always chasing, bringing everything Arteta wanted out of his CF to the table. In previous years, we've seen 4-4-2s, 4-4-1-1s, 4-1-4-1s, and we still see them, but I think I've seen the best of Arsenal this year in either a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1. The fullbacks invert, everyone but Partey pushes forward, and the team just zips the ball up and down waiting for an opening, then bang, you've been Arteta'd.
Arsenal, nothing personal.
Oh!
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon.
We have to build a culture that has to sustain the rest. If we don't have the right culture, in difficult moments, the tree is going to shake. So my job is to convince everybody this is how you're going to live, and if you're going to be part of this organization, it has to be in these terms and in this way. If I'm being honest, this quote isn't anything special. We've heard it before from managers, bosses, whatever you want to call them. But reading or hearing that and taking a look at what Arteta's Arsenal are doing right now proves that these weren't just words. The future is looking bright. I, like many, watched Arsenal's All or Nothing series on Amazon from last season expecting comedy. And while there was a dash of that, I came away from it with a surprised sense of admiration. It's very clear that this impossibly coiffed man is a serial workaholic, has a deep understanding of the psyche of a footballer, and is hell-bent on building strong, genuine connections with his players. I emphasized at the start of this video that Arsenal are playing well right now, mostly because this is their moment and I don't want the natural cynic in me to come out. But realistically, we have to address a few things that could very well put a massive spanner in the works for these lot. The squad is young. With an average age of 24, I'm sure some will be quick to point towards their inexperience in pressured deep league runs. They might be true, but I see no signs of faltering just yet. With postponed match days, a World Cup coming up, and a jam-packed schedule in the new year because of those reasons, Arsenal's squad depth will be brutally tested very soon, I think. The compassion of the owners has always been a bit dodgy, so who knows if their future decisions will actually be for the betterment of the club or not. Although, if Arsenal keep winning, I doubt anyone will care. Anyway, to wrap this one up, I just want to say it again. This is Arsenal's moment. Breathe it in and revel in it. Will they continue to go on? Is this only the beginning? My brother, who is an insufferable Arsenal fan, surely hopes so. And honestly, from a fan perspective, they say if you want loyalty, you should date an Arsenal fan. So with that in mind, I guess it's probably about time that that loyalty was rewarded. And there we have it. Let me know what you guys think about Arsenal in their current form. Go ahead and follow all the socials, links are in the description. That is all for me today. Really hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're having a great day. Cheers, and I'll catch you in the next one.